So, children, today we've got a fun story from the Prospect magazine, and this is Sarah Wollaston. I think that's how you say it, second name. But Wollaston's road back to Europe. The Conservative MP switched from Leave to Remain, and now she joins the millions of voters. Now she hopes, millions of voters will make the same journey, and we're going to talk a bit about later about what I think at the moment is the Brexiteer mindset, but we'll get into that later. But now we'll get into the story itself. So, ever since the 2016 EU referendum, lots of MPs, particularly on the Conservative side, have been at pains to shed their Remainer reputations. Previously outspoken pro-Europeans now pretend that they had nothing to do with Stronger In at all. Jeremy Hunt and Sadiq Javid fight to prove their pro-Brexit credentials. Far fewer have travelled in the opposite direction from Leave to Remain. But Sarah Walton is not your usual kind of Conservative. She has publicly backed Leave. Having publicly backed Leave in the run-up to the 2016 vote, the MPs for Tornez, I think that's how you say it, actually changed her mind mid-campaign. She has since become one of Parliament's most vocal campaigners for a people's vote. The chair of the Health Select Committee is widely respected in the Commons and now uses her influence to call out the hard Brexiteers. During our conversation at the Conservative conference, I found her in fighting spirit. Asked what she thought of the Foreign Secretary Jeremy Hunt's recent comparison of the EU to the Soviet Union, she shot back, "It's nonsense." I asked whether she would stay in an increasingly pro-Brexit Tory party, and she replied, "I would feel that an increasingly right-wing Conservative party was the one that I could stand on their manifesto at the next election. I need to see what that looked like, but no, I wouldn't." MPs normally display unwavering loyalty to the party, but Wollaston's priority is now the Remain campaign. What made her change her mind in 2016? What was going to come out of Brexit and the mess currently engulfing Parliament? And what were the prospects for voters taking Wollaston's journey in a second referendum? So I started the 2016 campaign as what you might call a soft Leave Eurosceptic, she said. And the more I listened to the relentless evidence about the complications, the more I realised that I couldn't possibly continue to advocate for Leave. When they announced the $350 million a week for the NHS, I knew that was nonsense, and that I was constantly saying to them that I wouldn't go on their bus to do any platform speeches for them. So many people were saying to me, quite senior people in the Leave campaign, that they knew that it was false. I thought, I cannot continue to have anything to do with these people. It went broader than that. The NHS is of a particular importance to Wollaston, who worked as a clinician for 23 years, but the referendum wasn't just about facts and figures, it spoke to our sense of who we are as a country. Wollaston seems to identify with the Liberal Remain side at this deeper level. For me, there was growing realisation that if I woke up on the day after the referendum and Britain had voted to leave, that it would feel to me like cause for celebration. It wouldn't feel like an extraordinary loss. I still feel that way. The very simplistic version of Brexit, that it would have been the easiest deal in history. The rosy sunlit uplands pictured that were presented to the public. We are now seeing that it was completely unrealistic. Talks with Europe are currently at a deadlock. The biggest danger now is a no-deal outcome. This is being willed by the ERG, and that's the pro-Brexit European Research Group, and its head, Jacob Rees-Mogg. Some of these people who are talking as if a no deal would be absolutely fine. It would not be fine. It would have very, very serious consequences indeed. We know we would be knowingly and deliberately inflicting economic pain. So another consequence would be the hard border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. It isn't fair to say that politicians... It is fair to say that politicians like Rees-Mogg and Boris Johnson are undermining the peace processes. I believe so, she says. It's a pretty serious accusation, one for a Conservative MP to make about another. But Johnson's hard Brexit speech today will have done little to dispel concerns. Wollaston is right about that Brexit presents grave threats, but what should be done? For her, the best way is to scrub out the first referendum with another. Going back to the medical side of things, we asked people 2 years ago whether or not they wish to have the process of negotiating to leave, and it would be akin, in my view, to someone consenting to major surgery 2 years in advance without them knowing whether or not they're consenting to have a leg or a few toes removed. I think that we would all expect that when we had major surgery, it is that someone sets out what the operation is, what all the risks are, and the benefits. And then you can decide whether or not to proceed. A second major ballot might make sense in principle, but how would that happen? So before we continue with this, I want to get in to the Brexiteer mindset, particularly these leaders of the Brexit campaign. Because here's the thing, think about this. For some 40 odd years, your group has been seen as nothing. It hasn't really been a power because you've been part of the Tory party, and that's been fine. But however, there are other people who are like, okay, Europe is pushing more and more regulation, especially financial regulation. We don't like that. So more and more of these people, and you'll notice that when you look at, shall we say, the European Research Group, you will notice that a lot of these people have trust funds. And a lot of this financial regulation that is coming in, particularly anti-tax avoidance directive, is primarily targeting trust funds and trusts that avoid massively paying taxes to the companies, and not only just, things like that, but you're also talking massive companies like Amazon as well. This is what these schemes are targeting. So think about this. All of a sudden, the referendum happens, and you didn't expect to win. No one on the Leave campaign expected to win. Remember, Nigel Farage came out and conceded. He did a concede speech where he conceded completely and basically said, oh, don't worry, we're going to continue this fight. This isn't the last time this would happen. Not only that, you had continuous quotes of him basically saying, yeah, if it's a close referendum, then yeah, we're going to push to have a second one. And what happened? They won. And oh God, we've now got to actually do something. Now, if I was Theresa May in this situation, the first thing I would do was I wouldn't be triggering Article 50. I would spend at least 2 years trying to figure out how this happens and what we do. And then, once you have all this information, go back to the country again and go, okay, these are the facts, this is what's going to happen. Do you still want to do it? Now, here's the thing. A lot of people in the 2006 referendum didn't care about leaving Europe. A lot of them voted primarily because they wanted to give David Cameron a black eye. That is what happened. And a lot of people voted on an economic basis. They voted because, they were, again, lied to by people in the Leave campaign and the unofficial Leave campaign that somehow we'll be fine. We know now this is not going to work out. It is going to be an economic disaster for this country, and is going to inflict purpose economic harm, and the people, the main people at fault of this will be the Tory party. And they are now worried that, bear in mind, it has been proven and shown that the electorate, if you, shall we say, don't fulfill your promises, or you are actually do something, that inflicts harm, like the Liberal Democrats found out when they said, oh yeah, we'll do this, this and this, and then come the next referendum, they were all but wiped out because of their Tory government coalition, a coalition they should have never entered into in the first place. You don't want a second referendum to happen, because after all this time you've been pushing to leave, the last thing you want is to have another referendum that says, okay, we win, and the result is, oh God, we're going to stay. Because here's their worry, is that now more and more people are starting to see, this isn't going to go our way next time, and you have more and more young people, and bear in mind, by the way, if you just take the number of young people that can now vote in that second referendum, the pure amount of young people would swing that vote to a Remain. The demographics of this are changing completely, and this is why they do not want a second referendum to happen, because it might not be a close one this time. It might actually be a resounding, crushing defeat for them, and they don't want that to happen, because all of a sudden it makes them look completely like a bunch of idiots. But anyway, we continue on. So, anyway, Walton continues. So a second ballot might happen. So a second ballot might make sense in principle, but how would it happen? So of course, any referendum, it needs to go through the House of Commons, and we should. And should we find ourselves in a no-deal situation, I think it's quite possible some MPs would take the view that it's so serious that we would actually be voting to have a very major negative impact. I mean, the ripples would spread out very widely, and I still hope that Parliament at that point would actually be wanting to check that there was informed consent for that. If the PM secures her Chequers deal, then Wollaston would still prefer a second vote, but it is less sure that Parliament would back her. Any referendum would have the option to remain, she said. Would the EU let us extend talks? They would be prepared to extend the Article 50 process if we were to allow for a second referendum, and they would want us back. They've said as much repeatedly, and we haven't left yet. It is one thing securing another vote, it is another to actually win it. How could the campaign convince Leavers from 2016? I think we would need to do a better job of actually setting out the benefits. It was a shame that the last referendum was such a negative campaign which didn't spell out the benefits, particularly for young people, of our membership. There is so much uncertainty swirling around that no one can say what will happen next. But if the Conservative Party continues down its hard Brexit path, and MPs like Walton start leaving or are forced out, they will certainly leave it worse off. There aren't enough politicians at the moment willing to change their mind when they see the evidence. There was one final question I wanted to ask. A prominent Remainer, active on Twitter, a woman, Wollaston must have faced some awful abuse these past few years. Massively. But if you're not afraid to rattle your rattled cages and put your head above the parapet, then you shouldn't be in this job. I'm afraid it's not going to stop me. And you will get that. More and more of that will happen. And if you look at the number of times newspapers have run their own campaign, would you vote differently? Would you vote to Remain? The answer is Remain would win. So there is no question in my mind the real reason these guys don't want to have another referendum is because they know they'd lose. And they might lose significantly. It wouldn't be a close thing, and that's their That's why they're so scared of putting another one. Because if these guys were so confident that they would win another second referendum, and then they could go, oh yeah, it's fine, we can go for all this hard Brexit nonsense now, because we voted twice and we've won twice, so yeah, full steam ahead. Then a second, and that's why, if you think about it, these guys should be wanting a second referendum, because then they can turn around to all these Remainers in their party and go, look, the British people have voted twice in a EU referendum, should we stay or should we leave, and I've voted twice to leave. So not only would a second referendum for them make completely perfect sense to them, because it would, secure their position even more, but they don't want that to happen, because now, the more, and I've said this more and more every day, more evidence comes in of how bad Brexit is going to be, and just the impacts to normal everyday people will be. And it makes more sense every day to stay in and say, look at all these benefits we have now of being a member. And, that's why they're so scared of another referendum happening. Because you'd think these guys, if they're so confident that Brexit is such a good idea and that people are going to vote for their Brexit, then they should be wanting a second referendum. Because it would do nothing more, again, if they win, than to solidify their position. So, why aren't they going for a second referendum? Because they're scared that they would lose it, and that they would lose it in a landslide.